Imagine standing under a tower of solid steel, 300 feet tall. Now imagine the weight of that steel pressing down on every square inch of your body. This is what it feels like to live at the bottom of the North Sea, where the pressure of the ocean will violently crush you faster than you can blink. Welcome to the world of saturation diving. It is one of the most dangerous, isolating, and highest-paying jobs on Earth. To work at these extreme depths, divers essentially become aliens to our world. Their bodies are saturated with pressurized gas. They live in cramped steel tubes for weeks at a time, entirely cut off from the surface atmosphere. If they were to step outside that tube without spending days slowly depressurizing, their blood would literally boil. On November 5, 1983, on a rig called the Byford Dolphin, a routine shift change was taking place. 4 divers were resting in their pressurized living quarters. 2 tenders were operating the doors from the outside. It was supposed to be a standard procedure, but a single fatal mistake in the sequence of operations was about to trigger one of the most violent and gruesome mechanical failures in human history. This is the story of an explosive decompression, and the terrifying physics of what happens when 9 atmospheres of pressure drop to 1 in a fraction of a second. Act 1. The alien environment. On the Byford Dolphin, you have to understand the physics of saturation diving. When you dive deep underwater, the pressure of the ocean compresses the air you breathe. The nitrogen and helium from your air tank dissolve directly into your bloodstream and tissues. Think of a sealed bottle of soda. While the cap is on, the liquid looks completely flat because the pressure keeps the carbon dioxide dissolved. But if you rip that cap off too fast, the pressure drops instantly. The gas violently expands, turning into bubbles. If this happens inside a human being, those bubbles block blood vessels, tear through organs, and stop the heart. It's called the bends, and it is excruciatingly painful. To prevent this, commercial divers use a system called saturation diving. Instead of depressurizing after every single shift, the divers live under extreme pressure for their entire month-long contract. They live in a pressurized habitat on the deck of the rig. When it's time to work, they crawl into a diving bell, which is detached and lowered to the ocean floor. They work in the freezing black water, crawl back into the bell, and are hoisted back to the surface where the bell is locked onto the living chambers. They never experience a change in pressure. For weeks, they live at 9 atmospheres, 9 times the pressure of the world you and I live in. Act 2. The routine. It was 4 a.m. on the Byford Dolphin. Inside Chamber 2, divers Edwin Coward and Roy Lucas were resting. In the transfer trunk, a small hallway connecting the living quarters to the diving bell. Divers Bjorn Bergersen and Troels Cramond had just finished their shift. They had crawled out of the bell and closed the heavy steel door behind them. Outside the chamber, 2 dive tenders, William Cramond and Martin Saunders, were running the procedure to disconnect the bell. This is a meticulous multi-step process. First, the divers inside close the door to the bell, then they close the door to the transfer trunk. The tenders then slowly bleed the pressurized gas out of the tiny space between those 2 doors. Only when the pressure in that space reaches 1 atmosphere, normal surface pressure, is it safe for the tenders to release the massive steel clamp holding the bell to the chamber. If that clamp is opened while there is still pressure inside, the heavy steel door will blow open like a vault packed with dynamite. Act 3. The mistake. To this day, nobody knows exactly why the sequence was broken. There was no intercom system connecting the tenders on the outside to the divers inside the trunk. They had to rely on visual signals through thick, tiny portholes. Diver Troels Cramond had just closed the door to the living chamber, but he hadn't fully locked it yet. On the outside, tender William Cramond made a fatal error. Before the pressure between the doors was bled off, before the divers were secure in the main chamber, he reached over and released the heavy steel clamp. Inside the trunk, the pressure was at 9 atmospheres. Outside, it was 1. When the clamp released, the pressure differential found its weak point. Act 4. A fraction of a second. What happened next took less than a fraction of a second. The 9 atmospheres of pressure violently blasted the diving bell away from the chamber. The sheer force of the expanding gas threw the tender William Cramond across the deck. He was killed instantly. The other tender was severely injured. But inside the chamber, the physics of the pressure drop were apocalyptic. For the 4 divers inside, the pressure dropped from 9 atmospheres to 1 in less time than it takes to blink. The air inside their lungs expanded so rapidly that it instantly ruptured their organs. Their blood, saturated with nitrogen, rapidly boiled, turning entirely into foam. Autopsies later found massive amounts of fat inside their arteries. The violent decompression had caused their fat cells to literally explode, pushing lipids directly into their bloodstreams. Divers Coward, Lucas, and Bergerson died in less than a millisecond. Their nervous systems did not even have the time to register pain. But for diver Troels Cramond, who had been standing directly in front of the door that blew open, the physics were even more catastrophic. The force of the escaping air was so incredibly powerful that it sucked his body through a 24-inch gap in the heavy steel door. The pressure gradient literally forced his body through a space a fraction of his size, tearing him apart instantly. When rescue crews finally arrived, the scene they found defied comprehension. It remains the most extreme case of explosive decompression in medical history. Act 5. The Legacy. In the aftermath, the companies involved immediately attempted to blame the dead tender, William Cramond, calling it a fatal human error. But human error is a symptom of bad design. The Byford Dolphin system had no fail-safes. There were no interlocking mechanisms to prevent the clamp from opening while the chamber was pressurized. There were no gauges on the outside of the door for the tenders to verify the pressure inside. It was an engineering disaster waiting for a single miscommunication. It took over 25 years of legal battles for the families of the victims to finally receive compensation. The Byford Dolphin incident forced the entire industry to redesign their pressure systems, mandating fail-safe interlocks that make this specific sequence of events mechanically impossible today. Saturation diving is still an incredibly dangerous job, but the men working at the bottom of the world today survive because of the brutal lessons learned in the freezing waters of the North Sea in 1983. The tragedy became a case study in engineering schools and industrial safety programs around the world. Investigators carefully reconstructed every step of the disaster, every valve position, every door movement, every action taken in the final seconds before the explosion. What they discovered was deeply unsettling. The disaster did not require multiple failures occurring at once. It required only one mistake, one misunderstood signal, one moment of misplaced confidence. In complex systems, that is often enough. The most dangerous machines are not always the ones that fail dramatically. They are the ones that appear safe until a hidden weakness is exposed. The Byford Dolphin revealed just such a weakness. It exposed the danger of relying entirely on human memory and procedure. Engineers have a saying, if a procedure is important enough, it should not depend solely on people remembering it. Good design anticipates mistakes. Great design makes mistakes impossible. The men who died on the Byford Dolphin paid the price for a system that failed to understand that principle. Their deaths were not caused by the ocean. They were not caused by a storm. They were not caused by equipment operating beyond its limits. They were caused by a flaw hidden in plain sight, a flaw that had existed every day the system was used. The North Sea itself is one of the harshest work environments on Earth. Freezing temperatures, violent storms, towering waves, months of darkness during winter. Yet even those dangers were predictable. The real threat came from a design oversight no one expected to become catastrophic. Today, modern saturation systems are built around multiple layers of protection. Mechanical locks prevent dangerous sequences from occurring. Pressure sensors continuously monitor critical areas. Automated alarms warn operators of unsafe conditions. Critical actions often require confirmation from multiple personnel. Every safeguard exists because someone learned a painful lesson. Safety regulations are often written in blood. Behind every warning label is a story. Behind every protocol is an accident. Behind every engineering standard is a disaster that revealed what happens when that standard does not exist. The Byford Dolphin became one of those defining moments. Its legacy extends far beyond a single oil platform. It changed how engineers think about pressure systems. It changed how diving operations are conducted. It changed how responsibility is assigned when systems fail. Most importantly, it reminded the industry that technology should protect people from inevitable human mistakes. Because humans will always make errors. They become tired, distracted, overworked, misinformed. No amount of training can completely eliminate that reality. Engineering must account for it. The best safety systems assume that mistakes will happen. Then they build barriers strong enough to stop those mistakes from becoming tragedies. More than 4 decades later, the names of the victims are still remembered, not simply because of how they died, but because their deaths transformed an industry. If you want to dive deeper into the dark side of engineering disasters, click the video on screen now to explore the devastating flaws hidden inside the Chernobyl reactors. Stay curious.